Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Price Check Podcast, basketball podcast brought to you by the In the Zone Network, where we go city to city, state to state, worldwide. It is officially NBA offseason, trade season, rumor season. The draft is tomorrow night. We're recording this here on Wednesday afternoon, June 21st. A lot to go over, a lot to cover here today in the world of the NBA. Players talking about being moved. We had our first big trade of the offseason that we'll get to here. As you can tell by the shirt that I'm wearing, it involves the Phoenix Suns. So let's just start there. Bradley Beal, St. Louis's own, STL, stand up. Bradley Beal traded from the Washington Wizards over the weekend to the Phoenix Suns. The Wizards in exchange get Chris Paul, Landry Shamet, and what could be as many as like 10 second-round picks at this point. So let's start with Phoenix. I do think if you're just comparing apples to apples, right, Chris Paul to Bradley Beal, you get the better of the trade if you're Phoenix. Does this make them a better, title contender, playoff team? I don't think so. I think for the most part, this is keeping them kind of stuck in neutral in comparison to the Denver team that we just saw win the Western Conference and ultimately win the NBA Finals. A team that also beat them in 6 games in the second round of the playoffs because they just didn't have enough guys. And this does not shore up that problem of giving them more guys to go to war with. Gives them another good hired gun, but from a defensive standpoint, still lacking on that side of the ball. They don't have the depth, at least right now. We'll see what continues to happen with the roster. We'll kind of get into that in a second as well. But they still don't have the depth. They still don't have the defense. Yeah, you go add another guy who can go get you to 25 to 30 on a given night, but 30 secret on that is also, just like with Kevin Durant, we saw them make that trade here right before the trade deadline. You're trading for guys that have not been playing full seasons the last couple years. If memory serves me correct, Brad has not played more than 60 games in any of the last 4 seasons. Now, you could, counter argument to that could be, even the smallest injuries, you might keep yourself out of some of those games, given that you were playing for the Wizards, a team that doesn't have much chance to compete. But the results are the results, right? So under 60 games for him the last 4 seasons. We've talked about in the past how Kevin Durant not only has not been able to play full seasons, but the actual injuries that he's suffering are pretty major. He's torn his MCL now 2 years in a row. He has also had a Jones fracture in his foot. So these are injuries that for a guy, especially of his size in terms of height, not injuries that, are going to allow you to play better long-term coming off of those injuries, right? So still a lot of questions to answer in terms of availability. Also, to me, you got to have a point guard. And I get that, Devin Booker, they want to lean into, his playmaking and, some of the things that he was able to show during the playoffs. But if we're being honest with ourselves about that, he also ran out of gas in the playoffs because he had to do so much. We saw it by the time they got to that game 6 and they're getting blasted by 30 points by Denver. He didn't have much gas left in the tank to be able to go get 30 points and then also go make sure that all the other guys got their shots too. So a lot to ask of Devin Booker, as great as he's been the past few seasons. He's still putting a lot on his plate to not only be the primary playmaker, but on most nights also go be the primary scorer, especially if Kevin Durant and Bradley Beal are not going to always be available. So still a little undecided on how exactly this affects Phoenix in terms of their ability to contend for an NBA title. But as of right now, again, we still do have the rest of the offseason to play out. They have the DeAndre Ayton card, which, there's been some rumors about him potentially still being shipped out. Brian Windhorst also reported yesterday that it's not impossible for him to stay in Phoenix. I find it very hard to believe that he's going to remain a Phoenix Sun until next season. But I also don't know who the trade partners are that are just going out and trying to get DeAndre Ayton. You saw some rumors come out today that the Boston Celtics were a team that may have been linked to Ayton before the Bradley Beal deal. We'll see what comes of that here now that the Bradley Beal trade has been finalized. Maybe Indiana, again, that was a team that he was willing to sign an offer sheet with last offseason before Phoenix was able to match the deal. So we'll see how the rest of this plays out from Phoenix's standpoint. But I still think they're at least a point guard and probably a big man short of being able to actually compete for a championship. But will be fun basketball to watch, at least offensively, with Brad, Book, and KD. Now, flip side of this, Washington. You probably wanted to get a little bit more for Brad Beal if you were going to trade him, but that's the effect of giving him a no-trade clause. He's going to, force your hand a little bit in terms of where you're able to send him and what you're able to get back in return. So not entirely their fault, but they also could have gotten out of the Bradley Beal business, a year or two ago and chose not to. So at the end of the day, this is just the consequences of kicking the can down the road for as long as you did. Now, what they do with Chris Paul is going to be very interesting. I do think that Chris Paul ends up being a guy that's bought out. They've, tried to play that game of, we're not going to rush a buyout. We'll hold them going into next season. No, you're not. Come on, Washington. We weren't born yesterday. We've seen this movie before. You're not holding on to him. You're going to buy him out. Why? Because guess what? You're not going anywhere anyway. Now, do you want to say I got an asset for Bradley Beal? I mean, I guess so, but the asset in this case is probably just going to be the cap space that you get, I guess, this offseason and next offseason, depending on what other moves you want to make. So, Brad's time in Washington, of course, you can feel how you want to feel about it. He did everything that was asked of him. Washington's front office can't necessarily say that they did the best job in putting talent around him. But we've also seen now with, how these NBA contracts are working, how the cap, salary cap, and now, subsequently the collective bargaining agreement is working. It's making it harder for you to put, good teams around these guys that are making max money, especially, calling a spade. In Brad's case, where you're paying A+ money to a guy that's like a B+ or A-. So, is what it is. Washington is going to try to figure this thing out on the fly. I would definitely try to trade Chris Paul, but also with the way his contract is structured, you're only guaranteeing half of his deal if you release him, I believe, before July 1st. So we'll see here over the next 10 days or so how that plans out. Washington could have done better. They should have done it a long time ago, but is what it is now. We'll see what they do in the draft tomorrow night. I believe they have the 8th overall pick. I would also, if I'm them, try to see if I can use Chris Paul to maybe trade up. Not sure of the teams that are picking in front of them who it might make sense for somebody to take on Chris Paul. But then again, we've seen wild trades year in and year out in this league. So wouldn't be surprised if a Chris Paul trade happens, but I do expect Washington to buy him out at some point and allow him to enter free agency. Now, if he is able to enter free agency, the rumors are that Chris Paul is going to go back to LA in some capacity. Clippers or Lakers. Me personally, you guys know where my fandom lies, of course, Lakers. But I don't know that Chris Paul changes the Lakers' destiny either. They need shooting. You can say that they need another playmaker or point guard, but at the same time, LeBron James didn't really give up the ball as much as we thought he would last year, even when he was running out of gas in the sweep against Denver. So, Chris Paul also not the same shooter now that he probably was earlier in his career. It may not make the most sense. And if I'm being 100% honest, I see no world where Chris Paul wants to actually go back and play for the Clippers again. And even if he does, it's probably going to be the same effect they got when they had Russell Westbrook last season, or the tail end of last season after he was bought out by the Lakers, traded to Utah and then bought out by the Jazz. It's not going to have much of an effect. It'll look good for a few games. He'll distribute the ball, get them in better positions to score. But all in all, you'd be adding another injury risk to a team with Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, who are two of the biggest injury risks in the league. And we'll get into Paul George a little bit later also. But injury risk upon injury risk, I don't see that benefiting the Clippers at all, and I really don't see that situation benefiting Chris Paul, especially when, we know he wants to win a ring. He doesn't have much time left, so right now he's going to try to maximize his window to be able to get an NBA championship, and I just don't think the Clippers are in the NBA championship contender talk, whether it's now or going into next season, since they really don't have a whole lot of roster moves that are going to be available to them, given that they've traded all of their picks to Oklahoma City and also used up all their cap space on guys like Nick Batum, Marcus Morris, Terrence Mann, traded Luke Kennard, but still you're giving out big contracts to role guys, and that's starting to come back and bite you a little bit. So not really sure that it helps the Clippers or Chris Paul. Honestly, not sure that him going to the Lakers is going to be the difference between them being able to get past the Nuggets team that we just saw. So, interesting to see how that will play out. But all in all, I expect Chris Paul to hit free agency and get his choice of his next destination as opposed to being traded again. So, wraps up the Phoenix trade. Who's next is the big question. Of course, again, reminder, we're a little over 24 hours out from the NBA draft. Typically, draft night is a night where we see a lot of trades happen, whether it's just picks involved or picks and players. We talked a little bit last time about, potentially Damian Lillard being, a guy that looks to get out, or maybe seeing what happens with like a Karl Anthony Towns, Trae Young, those types of guys. As of right now, and again, we're recording this on Wednesday afternoon, June 21st. There's some tweets going around, one specifically from Jack Settleman, that Damian Lillard has already requested a trade from Portland. I'm not trying to break news. We have not confirmed it with like a Chris Haynes or somebody that's typically been associated with Dame. But if he has, in fact, requested a trade, I think that's going to be that first domino that you need to fall here for the offseason to really get underway. We've already seen the Miami Heat linked to Dame. We've already seen the Brooklyn Nets linked to Dame. Of those two teams, Brooklyn probably has the most that they can offer, both from players as well as picks. Now, Miami Heat, they're probably just going to offer Tyler Hero, Duncan Robinson, and whatever first-round picks and pick swaps they can, drum up. Nets, on the other hand, they have some picks that are not only theirs, but from some other teams. They also have 2 first-round picks at the end of the first round tomorrow night that they can offer to Portland if the deal was able to get done that fast. Now, of course, Dame's contract is going to make a trade difficult regardless of where that is. But I do think if he is just looking for the absolute best chance to win, Miami is probably his best bet, especially if they can get him in a deal that does not require them, to give up Bam or Jimmy Butler. We've seen Miami be a team that can figure these things out, year in and year out with either undrafted guys or second-round picks, those types of players that they're able to find at all levels. So not worried about them being able to have the right supporting cast around those guys. And, I mean, look, we just saw this Miami team go to their 3rd Eastern Conference Finals in 4 years this year, their 2nd NBA Finals trip in 4 years this year. So if anybody can kind of figure this thing out around Dame, Jimmy, and Bam, it's Pat Riley and their front office in Miami. That's probably my favorite destination for Dame. Brooklyn, him and Mikal Bridges, that's okay, but it's not really any different from him and CJ being together for all those years in Portland. 2 really good players with some, questionable supporting cast around him is only going to get you to like a first or second round playoff exit. And at this stage of his career, that's not really what Dame wants. He really wants the opportunity to win a championship. He's come out and said that obviously, first choice being able to win that championship in Portland. But even if they were to trade this number 3 pick that they have tomorrow night, I'm not sure that they're getting back the types of pieces that they're going to need to truly be a championship contender in the West. Again, referencing the now defending champion Denver Nuggets, trade that pick for whatever. I don't think that would leave Portland with enough to get past Denver, and honestly, probably not even enough to get them into like a firm top 6 playoff spot. Probably would be a team that has to go through the play-in some way. So we'll see exactly what plays out with Dame's situation in Portland over the next 24 hours. Again, we have not seen any of your like major sports outlets, ESPN's, Athletic, Fox Sports, anybody like that. We have not seen anybody officially come out and say that Dame has requested a trade. But to Jack Settleman's credit, he was out in front on KD wanting to go to Phoenix. He was also out in front on James Harden staying in Philly last year and being able to get a chance to test free agency again this offseason. So we're definitely going to take his sources and his word for it as of right now. But, Dame, I think it is time. I do really think that he should explore that option of being able to go elsewhere. He's definitely given all that he can to Portland, both the franchise as well as the community. And I don't think it's going to be one of those situations where those fans have any backlash or animosity towards him. I think any basketball fan will understand that, as we've seen throughout the course of basketball history, players, teams, and, those roster setups, constructions, they have a limited shelf life. And Dame has kind of reached his end time in terms of what he can actually max out there in Portland. Because as we've seen the last couple of years, they have not been in the playoff mix whatsoever, outside of maybe potentially being a back-end play-in team. So, kind of hard to convince Dame to stay on board with that, given that he, 33, almost 34, going to be, kind of getting into the last stage of his career. So the last thing he wants to do is spend those final years on a team that's not going anywhere. So hopefully Dame's able to get to a good championship destination. We've also now seen rumors that the Clippers might be willing to part ways, or at least break up the duo of Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. So that's a team that apparently was kind of linked to Paul George, if that move happened to be in. By that team, I mean the Blazers. That might be something to be able to keep Dame in Portland, maybe. You get Paul George and maybe try to figure something else out with that third pick, but I imagine Clippers would probably want to try to get that third overall pick, if possible, in any Paul George trade. If it's not the Blazers, it probably is a team that is, maybe like the Rockets, that, they don't have their own pick going into next year. They obviously have the fourth pick in tomorrow night's draft. But they're a team that's not looking to be bad again next year. They want to win. They want to try to win now. They hired Ime Udoka. Paul George might be the kind of fit that they need, as far as somebody who can be long, rangy, play defense, kind of fit that Ime Udoka style of play that he displayed in Boston with Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum. And that might also be the way that they're able to lure a James Harden back to Houston, or any other free agents out there that they may want to take a swing at. So I don't know how much I believe, Paul George being moved like immediately, but I do think the Clippers have to do something also. They have, since this, pulling off the whole midnight steal thing that they did and getting Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, they've got one conference finals appearance. And I believe 3 out of these 4 or 5 seasons they've been together, Kawhi Leonard has not been healthy by the end of them. So, not a whole lot that they're getting in return for that investment that they made. And if you look at it on the opposite end of that trade, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, the young player that they gave up, is now an all-NBA caliber player. And all of those picks are starting to become due. So, that window that they had closed really quick, and they don't really have any other roster moves to make besides trading one of those 2 stars. Again, I mentioned the Marcus Morrises, the Nick Batums, those guys that they paid. Not guys that are attractive to other teams to be able to make another trade and get those guys off your books. So a lot of questions, but not a whole lot of answers if you're a team like the Clippers. Now, from a lottery standpoint, we talked about the draft. Got a bunch of teams in the lottery that are looking to trade picks. We talked about potentially, Charlotte trading picks, where, you got a team like New Orleans that has been rumored to move up to draft Scoot Henderson. Maybe they send Zion Williamson to Charlotte. We've seen Zion Williamson, unfortunately, in the news here for the better part of the last couple of weeks because of his off-the-court mishaps with some of the women in his life. We'll save the details for y'all who want to go on Twitter and go down that rabbit hole. But, might not be very much time left for Zion in New Orleans. Again, rumors around him that he might not even be on the team past tomorrow night. I'm not sure if I believe that just yet. I think that's a little bit soon to try to pull off a Zion trade. But also, if they're going to try to get Scoot Henderson, it would have to be tomorrow night. So maybe Zion goes to Charlotte at number 2. Obviously, we talked about Portland kind of being stuck at 3, not knowing whether to trade the pick or trade Dame. Houston apparently open if the right deal presents itself to trade pick number 4. You've also got Orlando at 6 and 11. They haven't been really rumored or connected to many players just yet, but that's a very young team that is also trying to take that next level up and start getting into like the playoff and play-in mix. Not really sure that taking 2 more lottery picks helps you achieve that goal. So maybe they try to package one of those picks or both of those picks with some of their young talent to get a star, get another veteran. We'll see how that plays out. Indiana has also been willing to shop their number 7 pick for another veteran that can kind of help them win or get towards that goal of getting to the playoffs again now. And Dallas at number 10. That's one team that I really have my eye on for tomorrow. Very widely known that they are looking to not only keep Kyrie Irving after trading for him at the trade deadline last year, but they're looking for more help to put around him and Luka. talks about, some guys that they could potentially take at 10, maybe like a Derek Lively, the big man out of Duke. Also saw Grady Dick out of Kansas, potentially rumors to them. But I do think what is going to be more attractive to them is if they can trade that pick, maybe with one of their bad expiring contracts, to try to get either cap space to sign somebody outright in free agency, or make a trade for a guy to come in, help them win now, and kind of be that glue around Luka and Kyrie moving into next season. So that's the team that I definitely think makes a deal at some point tomorrow. I also wouldn't be surprised if Charlotte traded pick number 2. Now, the rumors that have come out today are that they are locked in on drafting Brandon Miller. He's the better fit next to LaMelo Ball. We knew that. He was always a better fit next to LaMelo in comparison to Scoot Henderson, just because they basically played the same position, Scoot and LaMelo. But now that opens up some possibilities not only for them at 2, if they decided to trade the pick to some teams that want to trade up for Scoot, or they want to take Brandon Miller and let Portland slide into that team that gets to make the decision on whether or not they actually trade their pick or do something else with that. So if I had to make a prediction here, I did say last week we'll get 2 trades in the lottery. I think Dallas is one of those. My guess would be that Portland is probably the best bet for that other team that's going to make a trade during the lottery. Now, whether that's a Dame trade or them actually trading out of pick number 3, to be determined. But I think they make a deal at some point tomorrow. And I think Dallas makes another win now move to be able to try to compete next year, because, again, the clock is starting to tick on Luka and whether or not he's going to be interested in staying in Dallas long term as well. So a couple other quick pieces of news that we want to hit on before wrapping up today. A lot of teams that are kind of getting some things put out there. Minnesota apparently keeping their core guys together: Anthony Edwards, Karl Anthony Towns, Rudy Gobert. Of course, Karl Anthony Towns ended up missing a lot of last year, so they weren't able to really see what that team was like at full strength. Spoiler alert, not sold on it. I'm not buying any Minnesota Timberwolves stock, especially after how they looked in the playoffs. I just don't think Karl Anthony Towns needs to be playing with a big like Rudy Gobert. He has some outlandish comments on Pat Beverly's podcast, basically saying that people are going to look back on his career and say he changed the game. Just he's the best shooting big man of all time, as though Dirk Nowitzki never played. Well, I guess Cat, but all in all, he's supposed to be a big man. He doesn't want to play like one. That's what it comes down to. He wants to leave the playing defense, being around the rim, banging with other bigs. He wants to leave that to somebody that's another big. Totally fine, but you also, can't expect us to say you changed the game because you want to be a 7-foot power forward. So, sorry, Karl Anthony Towns. But Minnesota apparently keeping those guys together. Good luck. We'll see what that turns out to do for them going into next year. They got some role players that are going to be hitting free agency here, Naz Reid being the main one that they need to really try to keep. But we'll see if that works out for them. Apparently, Kyrie Irving, only bidder that he has right now in free agency is the Dallas Mavericks. So I expect that he's going to get his max deal to return to Dallas. Whether or not that influences Luka Doncic to stay there long term, we will see. But I do think Dallas has the capability to be one of the major players in this offseason. Mentioned that they might trade that number 10 pick. There's some rumors that Draymond Green could be a guy that they're looking at, which would definitely help them on the defensive end. Not sure how much of an offensive help he'll be, but he also can kind of take some of that playmaking load off of Kyrie and Luka's shoulders. So it could be a very good fit for them if he does decide to remain a free agent and not go back to Golden State. So I guess that kind of segues us into Draymond's decision to decline his player option, go into free agency this year. Everything that happened with the Golden State Warriors, from, the whole punching of Jordan Poole during training camp, and just kind of how everything played out all the way up to them getting eliminated in the playoffs by the Lakers. They just never had that chemistry. They also really never seemed like they had enough guys. And a lot of that's probably due to them trying to kind of find that bridge of playing to win now, but also playing to develop the future. There's also some rumors coming out of Golden State that Jonathan Kuminga is like 7 foot even now. So if that's the case, they probably are more than willing to say goodbye to Draymond Green. But I also think that these negotiations might not go the way that we think they're going, since Bob Myers is no longer the GM there in Golden State. So Draymond's a very interesting free agent to me, because I do think that he's valuable to other teams in a way that we may not believe, but I also think trying to make him fit, the same way that he did in Golden State just is not going to be what it is for the next team because they don't have Steph and Clay. It's just not the same thing. It's chemistry that's been built over time between those guys. I do think that, again, he'll be good, but he's not going to be the Draymond Green of old that we saw for so many years with the Warriors. Talked about Chris Paul potentially being on the move. Zach LaVine is another name to be on the lookout for. Bulls are kind of putting their feelers out to see what his trade value is. Thought is that they are looking to either get multiple first-round picks for him or another star player and maybe one first-round pick. We'll see how that plays out. I don't believe Zach LaVine is going to be moved, at least at that asking price. He's been good for the Bulls, but not good enough to be getting the same trade packages, let's say like a Donovan Mitchell or somebody along that line. Chicago's in a tough spot. They don't have their pick this year, obviously goes to Orlando. LaVine, DeRozan, Vucevic, there's only but so far those guys are going to be able to take you in terms of being able to contend for a championship. So now may be the good time to hit a reset button. They probably are not going to have Lonzo Ball again, at least for the majority of the season, based on what we've been hearing about his knee injury throughout not only the end of the regular season, but throughout these playoffs as well. Tough break for the Bulls, but I imagine they're going to try to continue to put those feelers out. I just don't know who's going to pay that asking price for Zach LaVine. So finally, it looks like Kyle Kuzma is also officially a free agent. Younger kind of combo forward that I'm sure will be attractive to some teams here. Who knows? Maybe even find his way back to the Los Angeles Lakers. You never know. But lastly, before we get out of here, we did also, at the very end of last week, get the details on the Ja Morant suspension. 25 games for Ja, which I can understand why people say that might be too hefty, right? 25 games is a lot for a guy that didn't actually shoot anybody, or he was only in the car with somebody that he knew when he showed the gun. He's not pointing at anybody. He's not doing anything dangerous. Turns out that he tried to say that it was a lighter that is in the shape, or I guess in the form of a gun. Even sent a demo video to some friends as well as the league during that process and evaluating whether or not he was going to be suspended. My only message to Ja is that if this is in fact a toy gun or a gun lighter, it's almost worse than having an actual gun. It's almost worse, because guess what? Police see you with that gun lighter, they're not going to ask questions. They're going to shoot you first, sir. So again, not to try to make light of that, situations that have played out with police and black men in this country here in the last few years. Definitely not trying to turn that into a joke, but at the same time, we have to be a little bit smarter in some of the arguments that we try to make for Ja's, Second Amendment rights and him being able to bear arms. There's not a whole lot of room to just be playing with guns. So I do think suspension, call it fair, call it unfair, I do think it's warranted. And I think Ja will learn from it, or at least I hope so. And to his credit, and I guess to Memphis' credit, in the games that he's missed in the previous years, they've been able to keep things afloat without him. So I don't think Memphis is going to be in any major trouble with him missing those 25 games. I imagine he's going to come out and play extremely well, having that extended offseason and time to kind of ramp up for the final third of the year. But, just stop toting the gun lighter, man. Stop toting the gun lighter. It's not helping you. It's not helping anybody around you. Leave it alone. Leave it at home. Go get you a regular big. That's all I can say. It's my only advice to Ja Morant. So that'll do it for us today on the Price Check Podcast. We got a lot coming up here. Of course, we'll be tracking all the draft coverage tomorrow night. We'll also be having Anthony Miller on here next week to get some WNBA talking here, because, of course, it's the ladies' game, too. So we'll talk WNBA, specifically Dallas Wings. At that time, we might also talk some Dallas Mavericks free agency. And we are officially going to be starting our summer interview series here in the next week or so as well. We what we used to call the manager special in terms of our Lakers season wrap up with my brothers James Williams and Keith Garner. We'll be bringing that back here as our first interview of that interview series. We'll kind of be doing kind of a trifecta, so to speak, big three of our own in that call. But we'll definitely get some other folks in here, all different walks of life, talking basketball, but also talking some things outside of basketball or basketball adjacent, as we'll call it. So, until next week, this has been another episode of the Price Check Podcast. I am Josh Price. Check it out.